Whatever the rights and wrongs of jailing Tommy Robinson are, his case has been, and still is, a rallying point for many, many people. Some are dyed-in-the-wool supporters that have been there from his beginnings of Luton all the way back in 2004. Others remain convinced that he is the racist thug, as they would see it. He's always been. Still more, however, are like me, the reluctant supporters. Reluctant because his name carries with it the baggage of more of a decade or more's worth of negative stereotyping from the mainstream media and the chattering classes. Reluctant because we fear that our support of Tommy might cost us friends we don't wish to lose. I've had to admit that I fell for the media smears whenever he was mentioned or interviewed, even though I knew at the time, that he was speaking, at the very least, a certain truth. I convinced myself that he really was a racist, but that he was very careful not to actually say anything racist. And I've also had to admit that one of the reasons I never supported him was because he was, and I can't believe I'm saying this, working class. Like I say, I cringe as I say it, as if I was little Lord Fauntleroy myself. It's funny because I went to a fairly well-to-do grammar school where I felt that I was discriminated against because my accent was too common. My teachers commented upon it. So it is with a fair degree of shame that I've looked down my nose at Tommy. So for the record, since I've yet to actually hear Tommy say anything racist, I don't believe that he is a racist. If I did, I'd say so. However, even if he were, which like I say I no longer believe, I'm still convinced that his jailing is an injustice. Sure, he sailed close to the wind, too close I suppose, but he was dealt with disproportionately, and that was no accident. It was politically motivated. Having said that, I think the authorities miscalculated. They probably thought that his arrest was a populist move, since everybody hates a racist. They imagined that he was still a fringe character, but then they've all been on a diet of nothing but mainstream media. Most of us are now getting our news from elsewhere, where it can't be packaged and processed and presented to be palatable to the prevailing narrative. That's a lot of peas, isn't it? So, his jailing is an injustice, and our general protests against the curtailing of our freedom of speech, amongst other things, have coalesced around the man as an embodiment of that very freedom of speech. As the famous phrase goes, penned I think by Orwell, if freedom means anything at all, it means the right to tell someone what they don't want to hear. But if he is released early, which I hope, or if his conviction is quashed, which I hope for more, what then? Do we all celebrate and think that the war is won? Those that wish to celebrate, namely those closest to Tommy, and not least the man himself, will be justified in allowing themselves to raise a glass or two for his deliverance. But what will have changed? Will the neo-fascist fist of our government, still wrapped in the all-inclusive, touchy-feely, all Muslims, even the ones who want to kill us, are lovely, velvet glove, just begin to dismantle itself and return itself to the sensible and democratic principles of yore? Will they re-establish the ideal of all citizens being equal before the law? Will the centuries-old assumption of innocent until proven guilty be spruced up, dusted off, and reinstalled as one of the cornerstones of British justice? Will they begin to erect the scaffolding so that the estimated 4.5 million CCTV cameras that watch our every move as if we were rats in a lab be taken down, so that we will return once again to being the free and unwatched, unmonitored, unindexed, unfiled and untethered nation that we used to be some 30 odd years ago? Will they see the error of their ways stop patronising the great majority of normal, sensible and upright citizens who also just happen to be people of colour, and abolish the hate speech laws? And will they even just pull back from the utter ridiculousness of believing that we as a society require transgender traffic lights in Trafalgar Square? I kid you not, as I've seen them myself. So will they? Will they fuck? So, what next? Really? The thing about political movements is that often they are very nebulous things. They come out of nowhere. Before Tommy's jailing, the protest was vaguely about the restrictions of our centuries-old right to speak freely. It coalesced around the multiple tragedies of the Muslim rape squads, which many of us feel were not stopped due to a de facto restriction on our speech, in that many felt that they couldn't speak out, or that when they did bravely speak out, they were ignored by institutions that seemed collectively to suffer a catastrophic lack of bravery themselves. And that's the positive spin. That's the kind way of putting it. That's given the social services, with a few honourable exceptions, the police, the politicians, except Sarah Champion, and most of all, the BBC, the benefit of the doubt. That's suggesting they were just neglectful rather than complicit. And the jury is still very much out on that point. But Tommy's arrest and jailing was the spark, and he became the issue. But he's not. He's just one of the principal actors in the drama. So we have to try and articulate what it is that we want from this situation. It's time to be specific. What do we really want? Well, I don't know what everybody else wants, although I can make a pretty fair guess. But I'm going to tell you what I want. And you should all think about what you want. And then we all need to get together and start thrashing this out. Well, what I want is a set of rights that we, as British citizens, are endowed with that cannot be removed or lessened or watered down or shot so full of holes because of this caveat and that exception that they become meaningless. Yeah, I want a Bill of Rights like the Americans have. And like in America, I want it to stand above normal parliamentary lawmaking. New political parties are all well and good, but the way our parliamentary system is set up makes it extremely difficult for new voices to be given a fair crack of the whip. How many votes did UKIP get in the election before last? 4 million, was it? That's probably more than 10% of the eligible voters. And what did it result in? 1 MP out of 650. So we need to get what we want by going through the back door, or more correctly, by going over the heads of government and having a referendum. They won't like it, but the Conservatives cracked under the pressure of the Eurosceptics, and now we're leaving Europe. It can be done. So what's first on the Bill of Rights? Well, what should be? Free speech, obviously. Only by having free speech enshrined in a law that cannot be overturned can we guarantee it. Only then. As I've said before, with our parliamentary system, if the governing party introduced a law that said we all had to wear underpants on our heads and got a simple majority, well, we'd all be walking around with underpants on our heads. Of course, there's a little more procedure than that, but that's the crux of our parliamentary system. We in Britain have no right at all that cannot be taken from us with a simple act of Parliament. Hence the hate speech laws. We have no line in the sand. And boy, do we need one. Secondly, and this is my particular hobby horse, freedom from intrusion and or movement. There needs to be a very hard bar set for government intrusion into people's lives, but thankfully it is a simple one, since it is already established in law. probable cause. There is no justification for the government to be monitoring any citizen unless there is probable cause that they are suspected of committing a crime. At all. None whatsoever. So that includes surveillance of public spaces, since they are public as opposed to government spaces, tracking of mobile phones, monitoring of private email correspondence and visiting of websites, tracking of individuals via Oyster cards and other travel cards, and last but very much not least, the tracking of vehicles using automatic number plate recognition. The reason I link freedom of movement in with freedom from intrusion is that movement is in no way free if it is being monitored. So those are the two biggies as far as I'm concerned, but there are others which I also feel need guaranteeing, such as equity before the law, some sort of guarantee for the right to own property. With taxation comes representation, a formal separation of the government and the judiciary. And I also think that the time has come for a distinct separation of church and state. Now, this is a big ask considering our parliamentary system. We will be asking in effect for things that Parliament cannot change. Well, they can, as the Americans can and do repeal some amendments and add others. But Parliament will not like that. It will not like it at all. The very reason there is such strife at present over Brexit is that Parliament considers itself to be the arbiter of change. But the result of a referendum, the absolute purest form of democracy, is the direct voice of the people. As I've said before, they think that they are in charge. We need to remind them that they are not, and what's more, they never have been. So with this video I'm actually asking a question. What do you all think? Is it worth a try? Perhaps you think I'm wrong. Maybe I am. But I think it has a much better chance, given enough support, than the very long game of trying to use the existing parliamentary system to effect change. Your thoughts?